What would you do if your closest ally became your deadliest enemy? When John, a high-powered executive, begins a steamy affair with his business partner's wife, Lily, he believes he's in control. But as passion turns to paranoia and betrayal lurks in every shadow, John will soon realize he's not the only one with secrets. Who's playing who in this deadly game of power, lust, and revenge? Keep watching to uncover the shocking twist that no one saw coming. John sat at the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey as the city's nightlife buzzed around him. The pressures of running a billion-dollar corporation weighed heavily on him, but tonight, the weight seemed lighter. Across the room, Lily entered, her presence commanding the attention of every man nearby. She moved with an effortless grace, her sleek black dress hugging every curve, and her eyes intense, dark, and filled with a spark found John's instantly. She was Derek's wife, John's business partner. But tonight she was much more than that. As she walked over to him, John could feel his pulse quicken. Their meetings had always been professional, but the stolen glances, the lingering touches, hinted at something far more dangerous. And now, here she was, standing inches away, her breath warm against his skin. "John," she whispered, her voice smooth like velvet. "I needed to get away from it all. From him." His throat tightened as he searched her eyes. There was an unspoken invitation, a tension simmering between them that neither could ignore any longer. "You're playing with fire," John murmured, but his voice betrayed his desire. Lily smiled, leaning closer, her hand gently brushing against his thigh. "Maybe I like the burn. That touch." It sent a jolt of electricity through him. He felt her warmth, the softness of her skin. The space between them seemed to disappear as her lips hovered close to his, teasing, tempting. He reached out, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her into him. She gasped softly, her body responding to his touch, their faces now inches apart. His fingers brushed against the small of her back, while hers found their way to the nape of his neck. "I've wanted this," she breathed, her lips finally meeting his. The kiss was slow, deep, and filled with the promise of something more. It was a kiss that could ruin them both, but neither cared. They were lost in the moment, consumed by passion. John's hand slid up her back, feeling the curves of her body as their kiss deepened. She pressed herself against him, her heartbeat echoing his own. When their lips finally parted, her eyes were ablaze with desire. "Not here," he whispered, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. He wanted her. He needed her. With a mischievous smile, Lily took his hand and led him out of the bar. They stumbled into the night, their hands never letting go, as they made their way to John's car. In the dim light, they kissed again, harder this time, their bodies entangled as if they couldn't be close enough. As they drove through the city streets, John's hand rested on her thigh, his thumb drawing circles on her skin. Every touch sent waves of anticipation between them. They reached a hotel, and without a word, they rushed inside. The moment the door clicked shut, their clothes began to disappear, piece by piece. His hands explored every inch of her body as her fingers traced the lines of his muscles. They kissed again, long and hungry, as they collapsed onto the bed, lost in the intensity of their affair. As the night unfolded, filled with passion and intimacy, neither of them thought about the consequences. It was only the beginning, a dangerous dance between lust and betrayal. But the fire they had ignited would soon consume them both. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of the hotel room, casting a golden glow over the tangled sheets. John lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Next to him, Lily slept peacefully, her arm draped over his chest, her breath soft and steady. The passion of the previous night still lingered on his skin, but now, in the harsh light of day, the weight of guilt began to settle in. He had crossed a line. Derek was his business partner, someone he trusted, but last night had changed everything. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Lily, the way her presence made his pulse race, but the consequences of their affair were now unavoidable. Lily stirred beside him, her lips brushing against his shoulder. She opened her eyes, smiling up at him, completely unbothered by the reality that gnawed at his conscience. "Morning," she whispered, her hands sliding up to his chest, fingers tracing lazy circles over his skin. John turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. "Lily, what we're doing, it's wrong." Her smile faltered for just a second before she leaned in, kissing him softly. "Does it feel wrong?" she murmured against his lips, her hand sliding down to his side, her touch igniting a familiar fire within him. For a moment, John gave in. He pulled her closer, their lips locking in a slow, sensual kiss. Her body pressed against his, and the world outside seemed to disappear. But even as they kissed, a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him of the betrayal. He broke away, breathless, his heart pounding. "Lily, this can't go on like this," he said, his voice low but firm. "Derek, he'll find out, and when he does." She silenced him with another kiss, this one more passionate, more demanding. Her hands tangled in his hair as she pressed herself against him, the heat between them undeniable. John's resistance melted away, and for a few moments, they were lost in each other again, their bodies entwined in a frenzy of desire. But as they lay together afterward, their breaths slowing, reality came crashing down again. "I can't lose everything for this," John muttered, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Lily propped herself up on her elbow, her fingers trailing lightly across his chest. "You won't," she said softly, her voice soothing. "Derek doesn't need to know. Us. It's our secret, and I'll make sure it stays that way." John turned to look at her, his brow furrowed. "And what about you? Do you feel nothing about this?" Lily's eyes darkened, a sly smile playing on her lips. "John, Derek and our marriage hasn't been real in a long time. He's more concerned with business than with me. And besides," she added, leaning closer to him, her lips brushing against his neck, "you're the one I want." Her words should have comforted him, but instead, they only made the knot in his stomach tighten. He knew the danger they were in, but he also knew he was already too far gone. Every time she touched him, kissed him, his resolve weakened. There was no turning back now. Later that day, John returned to the office, the weight of the affair heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't focus on his work, his mind consumed by thoughts of Lily, their nights together, and the inevitable disaster looming over them. Derek, oblivious, greeted him with his usual confidence, discussing company strategies and future deals. But every time Derek spoke, John's chest tightened with guilt. Days passed, and John and Lily continued their secret affair, stealing moments whenever they could, whispered phone calls, late-night meetings, hurried kisses in dark corners. Every encounter felt more dangerous than the last, but the thrill of it all only drew them closer. Then, one evening, as John sat at home, nursing a drink and thinking of Lily, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Derek. "We need to talk. Urgent. Meet me at the office. John's heart skipped a beat. Did Derek know? Was this the moment everything came crashing down? He hurried to the office, his mind racing. When he arrived, Derek was waiting for him, his expression unreadable. "We have a problem," Derek said, his voice cold. He handed John a document, his eyes narrowing. "Someone's been tampering with the financials. I think we're being sabotaged." John's blood ran cold. Was this Derek's way of starting to unravel his life? Or was something even more sinister at play? As John looked at the document in his hands, the paranoia began to creep in. Derek knew more than he was letting on. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. John's pulse quickened as he stared at the document in his hands. The numbers didn't make sense, missing funds, discrepancies in the accounts. His mind raced, wondering if Derek had uncovered more than just financial anomalies. Derek stood across from him, his face unreadable. "Whoever's doing this is trying to destroy us, John," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "We need to get ahead of it before it's too late." John nodded, but the weight of guilt made it hard to focus. He couldn't shake the feeling that Derek knew. Maybe this was part of his plan: lure him in, make him comfortable, then strike when he least expected it. The walls felt like they were closing in, and every breath seemed heavier than the last. Later that night, John found himself back in Lily's arms, seeking solace in her touch. Her lips trailed softly across his neck, her fingers slipping beneath his shirt as they lay together in the dimly lit room. But even in her embrace, his thoughts were consumed by Derek. Lily's eyes flickered with interest, but she quickly masked it with a sultry smile. "Sounds like business as usual," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him, her lips soft against his. "You need to relax, John." He kissed her back, feeling the familiar rush of desire, but his mind couldn't quiet down. As they lay entwined, their bodies pressed close, a gnawing sense of dread crept into his thoughts. Could Derek be setting him up? Was this all part of some grand scheme to unravel his life? The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia. John's interactions with Derek became strained. Every glance, every word, felt like a veiled threat. His work suffered and his focus slipped. Derek's presence, once a source of camaraderie, now felt like a looming shadow, dark and ominous. And yet, the affair with Lily intensified. Their moments together became more desperate, more passionate. Every kiss, every touch felt like it could be their last. Lily's lips were his escape, her touch a balm for his fraying nerves. But even as they made love, the guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of the dangerous game they were playing. One evening, after another hurried rendezvous, John lay beside Lily, his heart still racing from their encounter. What if Derek knows he blurted out, his voice heavy with anxiety? What if this is all a trap? Lily turned to face him, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his chest. "John, you're overthinking," she said softly. "Derek's too focused on the business to even notice. We're careful. He has no idea." Her reassurance did little to calm his nerves. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, his mind still spinning. "I don't know, Lily. Something doesn't feel right. He's acting strange, like he's waiting for something." Lily sat up beside him, her fingers lightly brushing against his arm. "John, you need to trust me," she whispered, leaning in close. "Derek doesn't know anything. He's too distracted with work and his own ambitions. We're safe." She kissed him, her lips soft and inviting, pulling him back into her orbit. For a moment, John allowed himself to get lost in her again. Her touch was intoxicating, her body a distraction from the mounting pressure. But deep down, he knew this couldn't last. As their kisses deepened, the room grew thick with tension. Lily's hand slid down his back, her breath hot against his skin. Their bodies moved together, the intensity of their affair reaching a fever pitch. Every moment with her felt more dangerous, more thrilling, as if they were dancing on the edge of a cliff. But as the passion subsided, the cold reality returned. John lay awake, his mind racing. He couldn't keep living like this, juggling lies, guilt, and the constant fear of discovery. The next day, John arrived at the office early, determined to confront Derek about the financial discrepancies. He needed answers, and more importantly, he needed to know if Derek was playing a game of his own. As John walked into Derek's office, he found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by documents and spreadsheets. Derek barely looked up as John entered, his focus entirely on the mess of papers before him. "John," Derek said, his tone clipped, "we're in deeper than I thought. Whoever's behind this is smarter than we gave them credit for. They've covered their tracks well." John felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Was this Derek's way of signaling that he knew, or was it something else entirely? "We need to talk," John said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Derek finally looked up, his eyes sharp and calculating. "About what?" John opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form the words, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "We'll talk later," Derek muttered, grabbing his coat. "Something's come up. I need to take care of it." As Derek hurried out of the office, John stood frozen, a sinking feeling in his gut. He watched Derek disappear down the hallway, and a chilling thought crept into his mind. Whatever was coming, it was far bigger than he had imagined. And Lily? She was in the center of it all. But whose side was she truly on? John's nerves were frayed. Every interaction with Derek felt like a silent accusation, a test of how much longer he could keep the affair hidden. The tension at the office had reached a breaking point. Derek's cryptic comments, his sudden absences, and the way he scrutinized every detail of their business suggested he knew more than John could bear to imagine. Meanwhile, his relationship with Lily became a sanctuary and a curse. They met in secret, their passion growing more fevered, as if they were trying to hold on to each other before everything inevitably crumbled. Their encounters were filled with whispered confessions, stolen kisses, and heated embraces. Yet, with each moment of intimacy, John's guilt deepened. It was late one evening when John found himself in Lily's apartment once again. The room was dimly lit, and she wore a silk robe that barely concealed her figure. As she approached him, her scent intoxicating, John felt the familiar rush of desire, but beneath it all, there was a gnawing dread. Lily reached out, cupping his face with both hands. "You're thinking too much," she whispered, her lips brushing against his. Her touch was warm, soothing, but John couldn't escape the storm inside his head. "We can't keep doing this, Lily," he muttered, though his hands were already trailing down her sides, feeling the softness of her skin. "Derek, something's off. I think he knows." Her smile remained unfazed as she leaned in and kissed him deeply. His resolve melted, and soon they were tangled in each other once more. Every kiss, every touch was filled with a desperation that only came from knowing the end was near. Lily straddled him, her robe falling open, revealing her bare skin. She kissed his neck, her breath hot against his ear, as John's hands roamed over her body. For a moment, everything else disappeared: the guilt, the fear, Derek, until it was just them, lost in the heat of the moment. But even as they made love, the sense of impending doom hung in the air. John knew they were playing a dangerous game, and it was only a matter of time before Derek made his move. Afterward, they lay in bed, their bodies slick with sweat, their breathing slowing. Lily rested her head on John's chest, tracing patterns on his skin with her fingers. "I don't understand how you're so calm," John said, his voice low. "He's not a fool, Lily. He'll figure it out." Lily tilted her head to look at him, her expression soft but unreadable. "John," she whispered, "you need to trust me. I'm handling it." The words sent a chill down his spine. What did she mean by handling it? He tried to push the thought away, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. The next day at the office, John's paranoia reached a new high. Derek had been quiet, too quiet. He barely spoke to John, his eyes scanning documents, emails, and reports with meticulous precision. John tried to focus on work, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying every conversation, every glance Derek had thrown his way. That evening, as John packed up to leave, Derek appeared in the doorway of his office, his expression cold. "We need to talk," Derek said, his voice firm. John's stomach dropped. "About what?" Derek closed the door behind him and walked over to the desk, dropping a stack of papers in front of John. "About this." John glanced down, his heart racing as he saw bank statements, phone records, and emails, all evidence of misappropriated funds. His breath caught in his throat. How did Derek find all this? "I trusted you," John Derek said, his tone icy. "But it seems you've been working against me. And it's not just the business, is it?" John's blood ran cold. The words were a veiled accusation, one that cut far deeper than the financial discrepancies. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, but Derek held up a hand to silence him. "I've been watching you," Derek continued. "For weeks now, I've seen the lies, the sneaking around. You thought you could outsmart me, but you forget I built this company. I see everything." John's heart pounded in his chest. The room seemed to close in around him. Derek knew. He had known all along. "You have no idea what you've done," John Derek said, stepping closer, his eyes burning with cold fury. "But you'll soon find out." Before John could respond, Derek turned and left the office, leaving John alone with the damning evidence scattered across his desk. As John stood there, his mind racing, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily: "We need to talk. Meet me at my place. Now. Dot." John's hands shook as he grabbed his things and hurried to his car. The drive to Lily's apartment felt like a blur, his mind spinning with questions and fear. When he arrived, she opened the door, her expression serious. "What's going on?" John demanded as soon as he stepped inside. "Derek knows, Lily. He knows everything." Lily closed the door behind him and turned to face him, her eyes glinting with something John couldn't quite place. "I know," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I've known for a while." John stared at her, confusion and panic flooding him. "What are you talking about?" Lily stepped closer, her hands resting on his chest. "Derek's been planning something for weeks. He's not going to let this go, John. But we can still fix this. We just need to be smart." John pulled back, his mind racing. "Fix this? How? He's already set the trap." Lily's lips curled into a slow smile. Not if we play it right. There was something in her tone, something cold and calculated, that made John's skin crawl. For the first time since the affair had started, he realized just how deep he was in. And now, he wasn't sure if he could trust Lily at all. The weight of everything pressed down on John as he stared at Lily, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the apartment's dim light. She stood before him, confident and calm, while his mind spun out of control. Derek knew everything. John was trapped, and Lily's suggestion that they could still fix things sounded more like a gamble than a plan. Lily, John said, his voice trembling, "This is getting out of hand." "What do you mean by playing it right? What are you not telling me?" Lily tilted her head, stepping closer until their faces were mere inches apart. Her fingers delicately traced the collar of his shirt, sending shivers down his spine. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "Trust me, John. I've been handling Derek for years." The implication of her words hit him like a freight train. He pulled back, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean? You've known all along." She didn't respond immediately, only offering a small, enigmatic smile. "I know Derek better than anyone, John. I know what he's capable of and how to stay ahead of him. But now it's time for you to decide. Are you with me or not?" John felt the room closing in. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. His mind raced back to all the stolen moments, the passionate embraces, the nights spent tangled in each other's arms. He thought he had been in control, but now it was clear Lily had been the one pulling the strings all along. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Derek. "Meet me at the warehouse. No more games." John's blood ran cold. The warehouse was where they had stored company records, old financial statements, everything that could be used against him. Derek was calling him out. This was it. "I have to go," John said, stepping away from Lily. "Derek wants to meet." Lily grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "You can't go," she warned, her voice sharp. "It's a trap." John looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. "What other choice do I have? He's already set everything in motion." Lily hesitated, her gaze softening as she let him go. "Just be careful, John," she said quietly. "And remember, I'll always be here, no matter what happens." John's stomach twisted as he walked out of the apartment and into the night. He could feel the weight of her words lingering behind him, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The warehouse loomed in front of him like a dark, empty shell. John stepped inside, his heart thudding in his chest. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the faint hum of electricity in the distance. "Derek," John called out, his voice echoing through the space. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from the shadows, Derek emerged, his expression calm but lethal, a cold glint in his eyes. "So," Derek said, his voice steady, "you've finally come clean." John's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay composed. "What do you want, Derek?" Derek laughed, a low, humorless sound. "What do I want? You think this is about the money, John? About the business?" He took a step closer, his eyes burning with fury. "No, this is about something much more personal." John swallowed hard, every muscle in his body tensing. "Derek, let's talk about this. We can fix it." "You're not in any position to fix anything," Derek cut him off, his tone icy. "You stole from me. You betrayed me. And now I'm going to take everything from you." John's heart raced. He could feel the walls closing in, but before he could respond, Derek reached into his coat and pulled out a gun. Panic surged through John as he raised his hands defensively. "Derek, wait." But Derek didn't wait. He moved swiftly, grabbing John by the collar and shoving him hard against the wall. The cold barrel of the gun pressed into his ribs, and John's breath caught in his throat. "You took my wife, my company, my life," Derek hissed, his face inches from John's. "Now I'm taking yours." The sound of the gunshot echoed through the empty warehouse. John slumped to the floor, gasping for breath, his vision blurring as pain ripped through him. Derek stood over him, watching as blood pooled beneath his body. The world around John seemed to fade, the edges of his vision going dark. The sound of footsteps filled the space, and through the haze of pain, he saw a pair of high heels clicking against the concrete floor. Lily. Aloe. She stepped into view, her expression unreadable as she looked down at John, her eyes cold and calculating. Lily. John gasped, his voice weak, his mind reeling from the betrayal. You knew. She crouched beside him, her lips curving into a soft smile. Of course I knew, John, she said softly. You think I didn't plan this from the beginning? John's heart sank as the full weight of the truth crashed down on him. Lily had been playing both sides, manipulating him, seducing him, and orchestrating his downfall. She leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear. Derek was always going to fall apart, she whispered. But you were the perfect pawn. I couldn't let either of you stand in my way. John's eyes fluttered shut, the pain overwhelming him, as Lily stood and walked toward Derek. Derek looked at her, confused and wary. Lily, what? Before he could finish his sentence, Lily calmly reached for the gun still in Derek's hand and fired a single shot, striking him in the chest. Derek's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Lily stood over both men, John and Derek, now dead, her expression calm and composed. She pocketed the gun, then glanced around the warehouse, her mind already working on the next steps to cover her tracks. With one final glance at the bodies, she turned and walked out into the night, a smile playing on her lips. Lily was now the sole heir to Derek's vast fortune, and no one would ever know the truth.